Good evening. A warm welcome to the speakers and to all of you at the Bangalore International Center, a place, a platform for informed conversations and dialogues enabled by donors and members. So welcome. This evening's session, Kalki, a celebration of a life of a great writer, the session Man for All Seasons, Writing with a Mission. Thank you, Gauri and Akila, for making this journey from Chennai to be with us at Bangalore. A round of applause for them. The speakers for this evening are Mr. Bhaskaran, author, historian, Postmaster General in the Tamil Nadu state, Gauri Ramnarayan, journalist, playwright, musician, and translator of this biography. Dr. Akila Ramnarayan, educator, musician, writer, playwright. Aishwarya, an acclaimed vocalist. Just to set context for this evening's session, this session is premised on the biography of Kalki, the Tamil version written by Sunda, and the recently brought out English translation by Dr. Gauri Ramnarayan. The speakers will delve into contribution, the towering presence of Kalki in India's socio-cultural spaces and beyond the borders. We commence this session with a musical rendering. Aishwarya will render the songs. The song that we've selected is from the film Meera, a film, the screenplay and dialogues were scripted by Kalki. There's a particular reason that we have chosen a song, Vrindavan Ki Mangal Leela. This song was written by Rehana Tayyabji, who was a social activist who gave up the atmosphere of affluence in her house to join this freedom movement and lived in the Mahatma Gandhi's ashram. In keeping with his spirit of collaboration, inclusivity, pan-India thinking, Kalki Krishnamurthy recognized the significance of this song. He translated this song and he wove it into the textures of the film. The role of Meera was essayed by M.S. Subbulakshmi and vocals were rendered by her. So this is a very significant song at multiple levels. The other reason being that we are celebrating the translation of Kalki's biography from Tamil to English. And what better way to showcase a song which showcases Kalki as a translator. His ultimate quest was that writings and thought reach many minds and hearts. So Aishwarya, an A-grade artist with All India Radio, don't look at her age, she's got great musical credentials, will render the song in both the languages. And then over to you, Gauri, to anchor the rest of the evening.
பிருந்தாவனத்தில் கண்ணன் வளர்ந்த அந்த நாளும் வந்திடாதோ பிருந்தாவனத்தில் கண்ணன் வளர்ந்த அந்த நாளும் வந்திடாதோ நந்தகுமாரன் விந்தை புரிந்த அந்த நாளும் வந்திடாதோ वृंदावन की मंगल लीला याद आवे वृंदावन की मंगल लीला याद आवे कृष्ण कन्हैया चैन चबीला याद आवे सखियन के संग घाट पे जाना निर्मल जमुना नीर नहाना सब मिलकर आलन गुनगाना कभी कभी वल्लभ दर्शन पाना அனைவரும் கூடி அவன் புகழ் பாடி நிர்மல யமுனா நதியினில் ஆடி வனம் வனம் திரிந்து வரதனை தேடி அனுதினம் அமுதனை தரிசனம் செய்த யாது ஆவே பிருந்தாவனத்தில் கண்ணன் வளர்ந்த அந்த நாளும் வந்திடாதோ. மானிடம் நானிடும் மங்கையரோடு மாதவத்தோறும் மயங்கிடும் மாறு தேனின் நினைத்திடும் தீங்குழலூதி தேனின் நினைத்திடும் தீங்குழலூதி முரளி धुन सुन दिल खिल मिलना मुरली धुन सुन दिल खिल मिलना कुंजन कुंजन मोहन मिलना याद आवे वृंदावन की मंगल लीला याद आवे चांदनी मधु चांदनी रात में रास रचाना रूप मंत्र से प्रेम जगाना कृष्ण रंग में हृदयन गाना कृष्ण रंग में हृदयन गाना आभा को प्रभु से मिल जाना याद आवे वृंदावन की मंगल लीला அந்த நாளும் வந்திடாதோ. போதமில்லா ஒரு பேதை மீரா 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 போதமில்லா ஒரு பேதை மீரா பிரபு गिरिधारी இதய சஞ்சாரி போதமில்லா ஒரு பேதை மீரா பிரபு गिरिधारी இதய சஞ்சாரி வேதம் வேதியார் விரிஞ்சனும் தேடும் வேதம் வேதியார் விரிஞ்சனும் தேடும் பாதமலர்கள் நோக நடந்த அந்த நாளும் வந்திடாதோ. யாது ஆவே वृंदावन की मंगल लीला याद आवे वृंदावनத்தில் கண்ணன் வளர்ந்த அந்த நாளும் வந்திடாதோ, அந்த நாளும் வந்திடாதோ, அந்த நாளும் வந்திடாதோ. ஓ ஓ ஓ ஓ
I don't know how to go next. I'm still tearing up from Aishwarya singing. It's so redolent of M.S. Subbulakshmi's impeccably pronounced, but ever so slightly Tamilized Hindi. You caught that so brilliantly. Thank you so much. And really, Andanalum Vandidado is the feeling that I think we all have. Thank you so much. I'm Akhila Ramnarayan, and I'm here as a proud great-granddaughter and proud daughter of Gauri Ramnarayan. I just wanted to say before I begin reading, all I'm here to do is read an excerpt from the biography, the English translation. But I would like to say, just send love to my great-grandmother, Rukmini Krishnamurthy, Kalki Krishnamurthy's wife, and her daughter, Anandi, who is Gauri's mother. These two women brought Kalki Krishnamurthy alive for us growing up. And I think everybody in the family has wept. There are some family members here, including Gauri's sister, Rukmini, Anandi's daughter. And I think we've all wept saying, why didn't we ever get a chance to meet Kalki Tata? But Babuji, Rukmini Krishnamurthy, we called her Babuji. There's a story behind that. She kept him alive for us. So this evening is in her memory. So today, I present two extracts from chapter 16, Kalki Krishnamurthy, His Life and Times, translated by Dr. Gauri Ramnarayan, from Ponniyin Pudalvar, the Tamil biography of the writer by Sunda M.R.M. Sundaram. These extracts are about Kalki's first encounters as a schoolboy with a statesman and a poet. Chapter 16, The Savant and the Poet. It was as a fourth form student in 1918 that Krishnamurthy saw Salem C. Rajagopalachari for the very first time. Back then, the man had not been given the well-known sobriquet Rajaji. It was 4 years later that leaders from North India started calling him Rajaji, just as they called Gandhi, Gandhiji. And 14 years later, under the pen name A Student, Kalki describes his first glimpse of the man who would become an august national leader and his cherished role model. One day, a big public meeting was held in front of the town hall. Bipin Chandra Pal, the famous nationalist and peerless orator from Bengal, was to speak on the occasion. A high school student was among those who came to see him and to hear him. The boy became eager to know the identity of a Tamil dignitary seated beside him. Who is he? He inquired from the man sitting next to him. Salem C. Rajagopalachari was the answer. That was when the youngster heard that name for the very first time. He was curious to know what qualified the man to sit on the dais next to Bipin Chandra Pal. What does he do in Salem? He is an eminent advocate, municipal chairman. The boy was not convinced that these were sufficient qualifications for the man to be seated with Pal. After all, the country was full of money-grabbing advocates and feckless municipal chairmen. What is his connection to the national movement? The boy asked. His neighbor seemed to know a lot, for he answered, he has funded those who serve the nation. Not bad. This was somewhat satisfactory. The boy asked, anything else? Ardent social reformer. He has been ostracized by members of the high caste communities in Salem for joining the untouchables for a meal. Until then, the youngster had not seen any Tamil born who had actually abjured caste distinctions and untouchability. No surprise that the boy now saw Rajaji as a valiant hero. For the youth of today, it would be difficult to understand the struggles undergone by the social reformers of those years. Traveling overseas, sitting down to meals with so-called untouchables, a non-Brahmin's presence when a Brahmin took his meal, even accepting drinking water from someone who belonged to a lower caste. All these and more were punished with social ostracism. In short, it was easier to go to prison than to work for social reform. Only after he was released from his first term of imprisonment did Kalki see Rajaji again. This time, he also got to speak to him. Let Kalki tell us about it. I quote, after spending all of 1922 in prison, I was released in early 1923. I was preyed upon by anxiety. Ayo, they have kicked me out of the cell. What am I to do now? S. Ramanathan, who was then secretary of the Tamil Nadu Congress Committee, put an end to my anxiety. His committee's headquarters were in Tiruchirappalli, and there he gave me the post of a clerk with a salary of 30 rupees. My family and friends were happy to know that the Congress paid any salary at all, but I was not happy. Do you know why? There was another clerk in the same office. He and I had been classmates. He did not quit school to join the non-cooperation movement as I had done. He was no great shakes in studies. He had not served the Congress for free, nor had he gone to prison. He got employed in this office when I was in prison and was now earning 40 rupees. What irked me was this. I, who had made sacrifices and undergone imprisonment, was paid 30 rupees. And he, who had done nothing at all, got 40? This thought ate at me. Therefore, a few months down the line, I applied for a raise in my salary. S. Ramanathan, who was very fond of me, added my request to the agenda of the next working committee meeting. Remember how in the Gaya Congress session, the faction that won wanted no change and confirmed the resolution to boycott the state legislative assembly? The Indian National Congress Committee met to discuss this situation and decided to take a neutral stand over the state assembly issue and not advocate the boycott. Since this was contrary to the resolution passed in the Gaya Congress, leaders opposed to these changes like Chakravarti Rajagopalachari, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel and Babu Rajendra Prasad resigned from the executive committee. Rajagopalachari wrote to S. Ramanathan and asked him to prepare a pamphlet in Tamil explaining their stance. Ramanathan asked me to do it. I wrote that pamphlet. It was sent to Rajaji for approval. The moment he got out of the train in Trichy to attend the state executive committee meeting, the first thing Rajaji asked Ramanathan was, "Who wrote the pamphlet you sent me?" Ramanathan pointed to me, standing nearby. What does he do? He works in the state executive committee office. I thought I saw signs of approval on Rajaji's face. For a few minutes, he talked about nothing but the pamphlet, saying how he liked everything about it, including the handwriting. Good, the master is happy. He will increase my salary, I thought. When this matter came up in the committee, Secretary Ramanathan recommended a raise of 5 rupees in the clerk's salary. Dr. Rajan, who had been responsible for my leaving school and who had a special fondness for me, enthusiastically seconded that proposal. The others agreed. Ramanathan was just about to note it down when Rajaji, who had been lost in thought until then, broke in to ask, Who gets an increment? I felt uncomfortable. Since the others said nothing, Rajaji looked at me and asked, "Why do you want an increment?" I stayed silent. He began to shower me with questions. "Are you married?" "No." "Your parents?" "My mother is alive." "Does she live with you?" "No, she lives with my elder brother." "Do you have anybody else to support?" "No." "When you live all by yourself, is 30 rupees per month not enough to meet your needs?" "Enough." "Then why do you want more?" Silence was my answer. I couldn't have told him what I had in mind, could I? Ramanathan came to my rescue and said, "He is very intelligent and does extremely useful work." Dr. Rajan affirmed this statement. This morning too, I said his pamphlet was well written. Does it follow that we have to pay him more? Not possible in the Congress. If he wants to be paid more for his intelligence, he should have taken up some other job. The matter was closed. I cannot tell you how anger welled up in me. But as the days passed, my anger turned into devotion. I can say that his ruthless dismissal of my salary demand, seeded that devotion. Much later, when I went to the Gandhi ashram in Tiruchengode and saw Rajaji living with his children in a hut thatched with palm leaves, I realized that he was not someone who stopped with giving advice to others. He had made immense sacrifices in his own life. End quote. On that visit, Kalki stayed in the Gandhi ashram for a week. He has described that experience at greater length in the same article, signed a student. I quote, "There, in a palm grove, in a hut thatched with palm leaves, Rajaji sat writing on a mat spread on the floor. This scene left the young man who had gone to take a look at the ashram absolutely wonderstruck. The wonder increased when he saw that Rajaji was teaching the alphabets to a group of children, including some from the untouchable community. He was astounded when he found Rajaji, his daughter, another woman, and several ashram inmates having their simple lunch cooked by a gounder boy. Seated in the same row with them were two young men from the Adi Dravida community." End quote. At this time, Kalki was merely a visitor at the Gandhi ashram. Later, he went to live and serve in that ashram for 5 years. As he worked closely with Rajaji, these feelings were transformed into deep-rooted bonding. In an article titled Yen Purvashramam, My Previous Life, Kalki says, and I quote, "Rajaji's appearance, speech, and all I learnt about his rectitude and his life of sacrifice instilled bhakti in me. I had the same devotion for Mahatma Gandhi as I had for Rajaji. Of course, Mahatma Gandhi's greatness is immeasurable. However, he is a man from Gujarat who does not know Tamil. So there is some difficulty in absorbing his teachings. But Rajaji belongs to our own Tamil realm. What he speaks in our mother tongue goes straight into our hearts." End quote. What he speaks in our mother tongue goes straight into our hearts. Now let us look at Kalki's very first glimpse of the poet who wrote the Gitanjali. In the same Trichy city where he first saw Rajaji, and around the same time, schoolboy Krishnamurthy saw the great poet from Bengal. One day, as he left school, he saw a poster announcing the arrival of Rabindranath Tagore to the city. Winner of the Nobel Prize, an international celebrity, a noble soul to whom Mahatma Gandhi bowed as Gurudev. What can you say when such a person comes to your own town? The youngster's heart swelled with eagerness and wonder, only to wilt as he noted the information printed below. there was a payment for hearing the poet's speech. 5 whole rupees for the Shantiniketan fund. In those days, 5 rupees was a huge amount even for the wealthy. For a poor student, it was an impossible sum. Impossible as it was, the desperate boy was determined to see the poet and hear him speak. He had 5 rupees left from the pittance his brother had sent from the village. "I will steal from myself," he said, as he paid every pie he had to get an entrance pass for the meeting, even though this meant that he would have to go penniless for the days to follow. 30 years later, Kalki wrote about his first Darshan of Tagore. I quote, "I made inquiries about the direction from which Tagore would enter the hall and go to the dais. I sat down on a chair close by. I was not disappointed. Surrounded by local dignitaries, Tagore did take that path to the stage. When Tagore passed me by, I touched his white silk robe and placed on my eye the hand that had touched him." End quote. When the enraptured Krishnamurthy looked at Tagore, he must have felt that a cloud sailing in the blue skies had wafted down to stroll on the earth. A face of copper gold hue, streaming white beard, a robe of white silk hanging from shoulders to feet. The youngster raised his hands to fold them respectfully, but an unconscious impulse made him touch the figure. What scent did he inhale as he placed over his eyes the fingers that had touched the poet? The scent of camphor or the lotus, the scent of poetry or fame? What did Kalki say about that experience? I quote, "That touch inspired me to read his poems like the Gitanjali and the Gardener and short stories like the Hungry Stones. I was intoxicated, and I drew a pleasurable comfort from Tagore's verse and prose, the same comfort I had felt when I touched his robe. It filled my heart."
Thank you, Akhila. So you had a taste of the kind of writing that Sunda has done, and which I wanted people who cannot read Tamil to be able to access. Now, I'm so happy that Sri Kedor Bhaskaran is here. He has agreed to say a few words about the book, and we are going to have some kind of a conversation, maybe? Yeah. Over to you.
Good evening, friends. I'm really happy to be here at this platform again. This book opens a window on a momentous period in Indian history, the 20s, 30s, and 40s. All the interesting events that happened in Tamil Nadu, in Madras, head of the Madras presidency, is recorded there. Historians of Indian freedom struggle have a tendency to ignore what happened in South India, in Madras presidency. There are many reasons for this. One is all the details of the freedom struggle events were recorded in Tamil, in the magazines, in ballads, in plays, and in popular literature. Whereas historians, they relied on archival material, which was usually in English, and also which gave the point of view of the government, not people's point of view. So for a long time, Madras presidency was pointed out as the benighted benighted province. Whereas here in this book, all the details of the freedom struggle, like Tiruchengodu Ashram, for example, what happened there. It was a center of activity during the Quit India movement and all that. And all that has been recorded in this book. And it's open to not only non-Tamils all over the world, but also the multitude of Tamils who do not read Tamil. Many such incidents, for example, Kalki's involvement with patriotic cinema, and the way Kalki promoted reading habit. I'll come to that a bit later, but now we will go to... Tell me, this is a tremendous work that you have done in translating this massive book. What was the motivation? What was the motivation?
Actually, I never thought that I would do translation. The only translation I had done earlier were two plays of Vijay Tendulkar. That was long, long ago. And I had not enjoyed translating somebody else's work. But the thing is, COVID happened. And my busy life as a theatre director and as a playwright, that was at a standstill. It was a lockdown and you were inside the house, and what do? Then my sister Rukmini, who's here, she suggested that I read to her. And my daughter joined her. And we used to have daily Zoom sessions for half an hour in the evenings, 5 days a week. And I started reading my grandfather's great novel, Alai Osai, which is about the freedom struggle. We finished that, and then my brother joined the group, and then he said, why don't you read this? And this went on for a very long time. But as we were reading it, they were so moved. I mean, I was reading it aloud to them in Tamil because all three of them do not read Tamil very easily, though they understand it well. They were so fascinated by Sundar's recreation of that entire era of the freedom struggle. Kalki died in 1954 and he was born in 1899. So this was during a very, very active period in India. So on several fronts, and he participated in everything. So we started reading it with the idea of learning something about a member of the family, a grandfather. Then suddenly we realized that this is not about my grandfather. This is about that entire epoch. And it has and that is what absolutely, look at the cast of characters in that book is astonishing, You have you have ordinary people, you have statesmen, politicians, you have national leaders, and then you have writers, musicians, everyone, an educationist, scientists, anyone of any significance during that period seems to appear in this book. So we really got to understand that entire world through this book, written so marvelously by Sundar. And the book also has a national sweep. It's definitely about Tamil Nadu, Tamil language, Tamil culture, about a Tamil writer. There's no doubt about it. But it has a national sweep because people, I think, in those times did not think in a very jingoistic way about their own little state. They were not frogs in the well. Look at Kalki being completely inspired by Tagore, So that is what fascinated me about the book, and the different approach they had, a kind of a holistic approach. And then it was also international because the World War was happening. And Britain was ruling India. This was a colonial region, and there was Hitler and Mussolini, and so many things were happening now, just as Ukraine war is fascinating us now. So all those things were happening across the world, and being a journalist, Kalki was deeply involved. He was an activist. He was a social, he participated in all the movements that he wrote about. So all these things were so exciting for us. My sister and my brother used to wait for that, time. He was in the US and, absolutely wait to hear me read, the next chapter. Then I thought, and they insisted that I should translate it. Actually, I did it because of them. And also because my sister has a Chinese friend to whom she used to report the day's readings. Ruby Law became so interested. She said that it must be written in English. So it was not something that I decided to do, but I was pushed into doing it. But I enjoyed it completely and thoroughly. And last thing that I'd like to say is that reading it aloud in Tamil, I fell in love with my language again, something that I had forgotten, or taken for granted. So I totally fell in love with it. And it was a pleasure to work in my mother tongue and try to communicate what was so excellently written in Tamil, try to communicate it in English so that other people could access it.
It's very interesting you should say that about reading, because one of the things that Kalki's work did to Tamil language was to promote reading.
Yes.
Yeah, see, novel itself is in Tamil only 100 years old. It's only in 1925 that, or thereabouts, that the first novel came. And Kalki's novel comes in the 30s. Now, earlier, novel reading was not considered a respectable thing. In short stories, you see, women are not allowed to read a novel. If they want to describe a vamp, they'll say she was reading novels. So Kalki's novel gives a respectability to reading. Earlier, that is before Kalki, the novels were a mere pastime, entertainment. But what Kalki did was that he wove into this work nationalism, Gandhian ideals, untouchability, like in Tyagabhumi, social reforms, the whole works. So, novel gets a respectability. And people began to read. Particularly the Tyagabhumi, see, all his novels were serialized. When Tyagabhumi was serialized, Ananda Vigadan carried portions every week, and people used to wait in the railway stations for the Ananda Vigadan parcel to come near the Higginbotham's shop, and will receive, and some of them will sit there and read, because if they take it home, there will be competition for the issue. So this was a big revolution in reading. And also, silent reading was promoted. Earlier, they used to read aloud, in school and in chanting and all that. But silent reading was promoted by Kalki's novels, and the whole novel, that format, that form of literature gets a respectability. So, they say it's about 30 lakhs people read Tyagabhumi every week, Sunda gives that figure. So, it is a tremendous jump in Tamil literature. And in this book, it's not only Kalki's writing, but the whole Tamil literary scene is covered. Number of writers, I don't want to mention names because they will be unfamiliar to you. They were all mentioned and their work is mentioned. And also the literary debate and criticism that arose is also documented by Sunda. What do you think about that, Gauri, this criticism about Kalki that came out?
The earliest criticism, I think, was in 1933. I'm not sure. I remember the exact year, when someone wrote in a magazine, a literary magazine, saying that there is a young man called Kalki who is writing extremely well, but unfortunately, he has got himself into the bog of propaganda. So he should give up propaganda and write works of lasting literary value. So Kalki's rejoinder to this was hilarious. Unfortunately, it sounds fantastic in Tamil because, each language has its own flavor. He says that, okay, I agree that, let me try and satisfy my critic. And he starts describing the spring season like Kalidasa. And then he ends up the beautiful breezes and the flowers blooming and the butterflies and everything. And then suddenly he says, this is in spring season, as in all seasons, the best thing is to wear khadi because the air can penetrate through the material, the way the texture of khadi, as milk cloth is something that will block the breeze from entering your, touching your skin and stuff like that. So finally he was making a bid for khadi, and then he stops there, and then he says, I started describing spring like a writer with lasting literary value, but unfortunately, it ended up in my promoting khadi. So let me be what I am all my life. Let me write for propaganda. Thousands of writers will come in the future in Tamil who will write works of lasting literary value. He ends there. So that was the first criticism. He was also the second thing which I want to be very brief about was that there was a group of coterie of literary writers, very fine writers, by the way, with whose mission in life was to criticize Kalki and say that he was commercializing literature and he was not maintaining the high standards and so on. So they had those polemics are fascinating to read and unbridled on both sides. Both seem to have enjoyed fighting with each other. That is what is so interesting when you read Pudumai Pittan's attacks on Kalki and Kalki's rejoinders. They seem to be sparring for fun and drawing a lot of energy from that.
He never gave up.
No.
He kept, yes.
No, and he had a lot of fun doing that. I think the others also had a lot of fun. And the thing is, later when he started his own magazine, all those writers who criticized him found themselves in that magazine writing contributing stories. So it was a different world.
But the debate keeps coming up. Now that Ponniyin Selvan is being filmed, the debate is again what kind of writing was Kalki's, and who were the people who criticized the Manikudi group of writers. Yeah.
Yes.
But I must tell you, what Venkatachalapati has written about, in his book, he has written a couple of pages on Kalki, and he says, Kalki's writing gave a climb from notoriety to respectability for novels. So, particularly, he talks about Tyagabhumi, And Tyagabhumi, incidentally, was made into a film. Now, usually people think that it was the DMK which used film for political purpose, but long time before, it was the Indian National Congress which used cinema for political purpose, for political propaganda, and the film actors got into direct action, direct political action in demonstrations, and like Chittur Nayaga was a delegate in Congress meeting, and number of them went to prison. In the Tyagabhumi particularly was very propagandistic. There was an interregnum of 2 years of Congress rule just before the Second World War, when Rajaji became the premier. At that time, the chief of the province was called a premier. And censorship was lifted. And we had a number of what is described by film historians as patriotic cinema came. And the best among them was Tyagabhumi. And the propaganda there was direct. There was somebody resembling Gandhi. Even his sitting posture was like Gandhi. And the film, even this group again criticized the film, if you know. But the film has gone down in history as one of the most important patriotic film, nationalistic film. And good copy is preserved in the National Film Archives. Now that film, Tyagabhumi, and films like that, gave cinema a respectability. Because cinema is not considered, it's considered a plebeian preoccupation, not worthy of serious considerations. Even now it continues. I mean, in university you have a department of music, you have dance, but not a department of cinema. It's not. And see what happened because of that in Tamil Nadu. So, that films like Tyagabhumi has to be seriously studied, and their part in nationalist struggle also should be documented. I think it has not been studied well. Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, Kalki was also a film critic. So, can you say something about Kalki as a film critic?
Yeah. Kalki, the very first film that came was, Tamil film was Kalidas, and the first review was written by Kalki. And he kept on reviewing. Then he got involved in films in many dimensions. He was the story writer. For Meera, he wrote the songs and the dialogue. He traveled with the group to all the places in Rajasthan and Dwaraka. So, his interaction with cinema is that at all levels, but unfortunately, it never picked up in the sense nobody started taking. Not many writers took cinema seriously as Kalki did, you know. So, cinema review and writing about it was not given a respectable place in magazines as Anandavigadan or Kalki did.
Yeah, Sundar, the writer who's done his research is so astonishing. He has discovered Kalki's mark sheets in his school. He went and found his essays in the school, and he has assembled the entire. If you read the book, you will know that Sundar's method of presenting Kalki's life story is fascinating because he uses multiple voices. He uses the writings of others, letters of others. He also uses Kalki's own writings in order to describe the place where he was born, Kalki, the village where Kalki was born. He takes extracts from 4 or 5 different novels of Kalki where Kalki has described the village and says, this is exactly the place where Kalki was born. And he draws those parallels between Kalki's own experiences and the experiences of his characters and the novels that he wrote. And for people here who may not know, I just wanted to make this point that this man, Kalki, began as a pamphleteer. He wrote pamphlets for the Congress party.
Yes,
you read them, you saw that in the reading. Then he started translating. He joined a very reputed magazine as a very young man, and he was asked to translate Gandhi's My Experiments with Truth. So that was the first work that he actually wrote. His first publication was also Satya Sodhane, which is My Experiments with Truth. And then he started writing short stories in order to propagate anti-liquor, the anti-liquor movement and prohibition. And then I don't know what happened. Suddenly he started writing fiction, which became articles, humorous essays. He has written everything, songs. He's written everything except plays. That's the only thing that he left untouched. And then he became a speaker. He promoted political causes, social reformist causes of education. It's like unbelievable the number of things that he got. He had his fingers in every pie. He was a brilliant orator. I don't know if 24 hours was enough for him, and he died when he was 54. it is kind of astonishing how many novels he wrote, how many political leaders, because most of his writing in his magazine and wherever he wrote, wherever he was working, he wrote leaders on politics. He wrote about some social reformist cause. He also reviewed dance, classical music, classical dance, theater, cinema. There was nothing that he left untouched. So, so what happens with this book is that we get entry into all these worlds.
Yeah, he also, number of his films, a number of his stories on contemporary setting have been made into films, as you know, Kallunin Kadali.
Yes.
Then Ponvayal.
They were not successful. Tyagabhumi was, but the others were not.
Kallunin Kadali was quite good.
Yeah.
I mean, it still comes on afternoon TV, you know. Ponvayal, and the interesting thing is that in the 50s, beginning of 50s, DMK comes into the political scene, and they come up with films like Parasakti, Velaikari, Nalathambi, and Kalki reviews these movies. They are very, very imaginative. For example, Velaikari, which is a film written by C.N. Annadurai, and it's a atheistic movie, anti-God, anti-ritualistic. And Kalki reviewed it and gave the title as Kaliyin Karunai. That is the review he did.
The compassion of the mother goddess.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Because the hero starts as a bhakta, as a devotee. And then when he sees one of the plays of Annadurai, though they were completely in totally different opposite camps, he praised that play and went hyperbolic. He called him Bernard Shaw of South India.
Yeah. So he was, yeah. So, and in fact, Karunanidhi, the chief minister, was very fond of, I've heard him speaking in public, in public meetings several times, repeating Kalki's words, praising him for his dialogues in the film Parashakti. Because I'm sorry, I don't think it will sound as powerful in English, but he calls Annadurai's dialogues explosive and fiery. And he says that we cannot call them, this is not dialogue, this is explosion. This is like the falling of atom bombs, you know. And so he was absolutely open to, I don't think he was narrow-minded at all when it came to accepting excellence where he found it. I think that is something that I learned from this. And one of the things that I had read in Kalki's writings, which I'm not able to locate right now, but I was very young, I was about 13 or 14, when Kalki quotes Voltaire, and we know that what he has quoted is something that he practiced through his entire life. And that quotation is of Voltaire, the French philosopher, is that I disagree with every word you say, but I will fight unto my death your right to say it. So that kind of attitude it's not there anymore. I mean,
about his criticism of films, you know, he didn't care for film music.
no,
He called it dabba music.
yes,
The elitist prejudice that is so common, you can see that in his criticism of film music. He didn't recognize it as the music of the subaltern, but it has grown into as the people's music, and film musicians get great national honors. His writings on film music, you can see, was very, very critical. Sunda quotes a number of them.
yes. And
I want to ask you one thing about this translation. I don't know how we are on time.
another 10 minutes.
That is, you see, in Tamil, number of fictional works have been translated. And very little non-fiction, particularly biography, and yours is one. It's a tremendous work that you have done, as Rajmohan Gandhi says in the preface. Your translation flows like Kaveri. Now, tell me, what are the problems you faced?
The problems are that it's always very difficult to render what you find in one language into another language, that I think all translators face. But it's particularly difficult to translate from an Indian language into English, because the cultural difference is so great. I think it's easier to translate from Tamil to Kannada and Kannada to Tamil, because our thinking, our culture, even Hindi and Tamil, or Bengali and Tamil. But I think it is very difficult to do it in English, because English kind of militates against the kind of sentiments that we go in for. I don't mean sentimentality, the way we look at things, our cultural values, the kind of ethics we follow. All that is, I think, difficult. So that is a major problem. But I think I should just say, I want to talk about the process first. I decided that I would do 2 chapters a day and then go back and revisit them, revisit, correct, refine, edit, and so on. But those 2 chapters, I was just doing every single day in order to get into the rhythm of translating. And I found Sunda more difficult to translate than Kalki. Kalki somehow leaps off the page, but Sunda was so analytical and so dense and so full of information and facts. It was difficult, and particularly words like Satta Sabai, which could be the parliament, it could be the state assembly, it could be the provincial council, legislature. So what was it at that particular time? What was it at that time? Was it the state legislature, or was it a provincial council? And things like so many different these kinds of specific terms for institutions, movements, ideas. Those were very difficult to translate, especially because you had to look at the time period and know what that thing was called at that particular time. So that was difficult. Anything else? Kalki's descriptions, which he has quoted, are very difficult, because, see, I think our writers have a different stylistic flow, Indian writers, and particularly Kalki uses onomatopoeia a lot. Sala sala, gala gala, kada kada, gudu, things like that. And silir endre irundhathu, things like that, which you really cannot bring, you cannot translate that in English. What we can do is to approximate to that experience. That it requires a lot of daring, because you feel that you've not done exactly what is in the original, and you're giving an approximation. Is that fair? Is that adequate? That those doubts are always there. But I think at one point I decided that this translation, I'm doing this translation, I've not been commissioned to do it. I'm doing it for myself. I'm doing it out of passion. And I'm doing it as a process of discovery for myself. Not only about the subject, but also about language. I learned that the relationship between sound and word, between word and language, from one language to another. These are the linguistic aspects which you learn, and they were so exciting to discover in the process of writing. And I think that, I learned a lot about emotions. How emotions are conveyed through words, When you translate from one language to the other, how do you convey the emotion, which is so easily conveyed in your Indian language, into English, which sometimes does not have that particular shade of emotion? I don't know how else to explain this. Yeah, I'll give you one example and then I will stop. The example is, there is a place where there is, I think I'll just read it. I marked it. I'll just read this. This is, Kalki goes to visit Mahatma Gandhi in Pune. He has just finished his fast. Mahatma Gandhi has finished his fast, and then he says that he had gone as a reporter from Anandaviketan, which prizes humor. But the situation was such that you could not really expect the Mahatma to, be humorous about the situation in India. It was beyond humor. But he says, it's not that Gandhi has given up smiles and laughter. I'm reading from Kalki's writing, okay, quoted by Sunda. It is not that Gandhi has given up smiles and laughter, but there are many kinds of laughter. One of them is cracking up when you see a stranger, tumbling down because you tripped him up. Breaking into laughter when afflicted by deep sorrow is another. A madman tears his clothes with manic laughter. Cheap and bawdy banter makes some folks freak out in laughter. But the Mahatma's smile reminded me of the smile of Shiva, which consumed the Tripura demons. With his laughter, the Mahatma wants to destroy all the evils besetting our country, just as once, long ago, Shiva destroyed the Tripura demons who personified evil. From his body rises the fire of the rigorous penance he has just performed. I have no doubt that today or tomorrow or on some day in the future, the blazing power of that penance will burn to cinders all the rampant evils plaguing our nation. This was something that was impossible to, I've only given you an approximation. The way Kalki feels about Gandhi, the devotion, the trust, the faith, the adoration, that the complete belief in Gandhi's ethical values, and Gandhi's sacrifice, Gandhi's austerity as a model. These are all things which he conveyed through his language, which may be easily translatable in Kannada or in Hindi or Marathi, but to do it in English is difficult because this kind of attitude does not exist in English. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
It's very interesting you make this point because recently, that's about 3 weeks ago, there was an article interview with Gayatri Spivak in Hindu on translation.
Yes.
And she was talking about translating Maheshwata Devi into English.
Yes.
The same problems and the same issues. So it is a very real thing. And that's what the challenge is, I think,
Yes.
from one culture into another culture.
Sometimes you succeed, but there are certain moments, I think possibly where the writer has put his entire being into that writing, into his language or her language, that entire, the fire of the writer is in that language. How to communicate it in another, how to transcreate it, how to transpose it, that is a challenge. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you approximate.
You have done a great job by the footnotes that you have given.
Thank you.
Because this will help a lot of students all over the world to pursue their research, because it opens up a new window on South Indian studies.
We have to, I think, close now. Is there anything else that you want to add, sir?
No, except one point that one book that Kalki wrote on Gandhi, other than the Sati Sadhana, Mandarul. Yeah, that helped a lot to popularize, to promote the ideals of Gandhi, and to introduce him as a human being, as a man, as a leader to the Tamil populace.
Thank you very much. Talking about translation, he asked me about my motivation, and I just wanted to say, just share this with you, that the person that I have in mind when I'm translating is my son, who doesn't know Tamil, but is a voracious reader and a very intelligent person. And he knows very little about this world. So the footnotes and everything, they're all for him. And for anybody else who makes the effort to read this. So thank you very much for being so patient and listening to us. And thank you so much, sir, for sharing your knowledge and your understanding of the subject. Akhila, thank you for reading it and so well. And Aishwarya, thank you very much for singing that song beautifully. And I particularly want to thank BIC, Sadhana, Mr. Ravi, who both of whom invited me here to present this conversation, this reading, and the music. Thank you very much, Sadhana.
So, Gauri, just to, we bookended with culture. So, we commenced with a song and we bookended with, we couldn't have the dance here, but we've got a film. So, would you like to speak a little bit about the dance and the music?
Yes.
And then we'll probably open it to Q&A.
Yes. You can,
We
yeah.
have the film ready.
You have it ready? Okay. I'll give you a very brief introduction. This is a song written by Kalki in one of his great historical novels. And it is the protagonist is a Devadasi, a courtesan, a brilliant dancer. And I produced this as a sort of, I wrote a play based on it. It was not exactly Kalki's, it was called Shivakami in Shapatam, Shivakami's Vow. I did not dare to do that entire novel, but I did a play based on that. And I wanted somebody to play Shivakami, and Priyadarshini Govind, the dancer, she played that role so brilliantly. And since I had a dancer playing the role, I also created moments for her to dance on the stage. And this was one of the songs that she danced to in the play. You will see a 5-minute clip of that. It is மறவேன் மறவேன் என்று வேலின் மேல் ஆணையிட்ட மன்னரும் மறப்பாரோ நீலமயிலே. Lovely, all women in Bharatanatyam are lovely, all the protagonists. This lovely young woman is thinking of the Lord whom she loves passionately, who has not come to see her and who might have forgotten her. So she sends her peacock as a messenger, asking the peacock to bring him to her.
மறவேன் மறவேன் என்று வேலில் மேல் ஆணையிட்ட மன்னரும் மறப்பாரோ நீலமயிலே. மறவேன் மன்னரும் மறப்பாரோ நீலமயிலே. உருகி உருகி உள்ளம் அவரை நினைவதையும் உயிரும் கரைவதையும் அறியாரோ மயிலே. உருகி உருகி உள்ளம் அவரை நினைவதையும் உயிரும் கரைவதையும் அறியாரோ மயிலே. அறியாரோ மயிலே. அறியாரோ மயிலே. பெம்மான் உன்மேலே வரும் பெருமீதம் தலை கேறி பாதை மறந்தாயோ பேதை மயிலே பெம்மான் உன்மேலே வரும் பெருமீதம் தலை கேறி பாதை மறந்தாயோ பேதை மயிலே பேதை மயிலே பேதை மயிலே பேதை மயிலே 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 வன்மம் மனதில் கொண்டு வஞ்சம் தீர்க்க நினைத்து வழியில் உறங்கினாயோ வழி நீ மயிலே வன்மம் மனதில் கொண்டு வஞ்சம் தீர்க்க நினைத்து வழியில் உறங்கினாயோ வழி நீ மயிலே.
I request you all, those of you who have a question, to come up here.
Good evening, and thank you for that wonderful conversation. As someone who's not just a translator but who's also an author, and someone who's not just academically interested but also emotionally invested in this, I would be very curious to know where you found your voice coming into this translation, and if you could share some instances of how we could glimpse your voice amidst the voices of Kalki and Sundar.
That's a very, very interesting question, but I've never thought about it, I never thought of my voice because, there is a great writer and there is another fantastic writer who is writing his biography. Both of them are giants. Sundar, who wrote the biography, is an extraordinary writer, though he wrote very little. But what he wrote brilliantly. And this particular book, he has taken so much trouble to collect the information and put it together. What is lovely, if you read the book, you'll know there is absolutely no eulogy, which is a major problem with Indian biographies, you just make that person to the sun and the moon and the stars and all the gods. But Sundar has avoided that, and he has used a very steady voice, that's what I can say, to talk about this. So my concern was to convey Sundar's voice. So I wasn't thinking about my voice at all. And then Sundar has quoted Kalki so much. And so, there is Kalki's voice, Who am I before these two great people? But now that you ask me that question, I think my voice may be, I'm not sure about this, okay? I don't know. My voice may be present in the language because I'm using a language which they have not used. And and what I have tried to do in this, after all, I'm Kalki's granddaughter, and to me, communication is very important. I don't translate for myself. Yes, I was passionate about it, but the translation is to make it accessible to others, not for people to think about me as a writer. So I think I didn't think about myself. Actually, I'm not a regular translator. So I'm now going to salute all the translators across the world in any language, because this is really a thankless job. There is neither fame nor money, nor anything not even name in this, So I'm so glad that it is passion which makes them translate. So I salute all the translators, and I hope that I have done my part.
But it is a process of learning.
It's a great process of learning, absolutely. When you translate, you learn much more than when you are writing your own stuff. That's true. But I can't wait to get back to write my own stuff now.
Specifically, during the 20s, 30s, and 40s, Periyar was also a very important political figure, social figure. So, were there any interactions between Kalki and Periyar? Were there sparks? Did they agree? Did they disagree?
You have to read the book. I'm not going to give it away, but I will tell you something which may not be in the book. I think it's not in the book, but I'm doing another book now, so this is at the back of my mind. Periyar did, Periyar never went to any wedding which was performed in a traditional manner with rituals, religious rituals. But he attended my mother's wedding, Kalki's daughter's wedding. He came after the Mangal Sutra ceremony was over. He came and he took this sacred ash and smeared it on my mother and her husband, my father. So she smeared it on them. And then he said, I came because of my affection for you, though I don't go for all these functions. And this I smear on them as my expression of affection and good wishes for the newlywed couple. So I don't think this is in the biography. So, yeah. So this will tell you the kind of relationship they had. See, Periyar was a senior, actually. But I think Kalki enjoyed meeting people who had... Okay. I think Kalki enjoyed meeting people, interacting with people who had opinions which were different from him. Because, that's the only way you can learn. If you and I are going to agree all the time, I don't think we'll learn much from each other, right?
He had interactions with the DMK.
Yes.
In writing
Yes.
reviews.
Yes.
All right. At BIC, we have a ritual of commencing and closing on time. It's a ritual that we follow with great sincerity. So, a big round of thanks to all the speakers. Mr. Bhaskaran, Dr. Gauri, Dr. Akhila, and Aishwarya, and to the audience for coming, and to thank you for making a slice of history and literature come alive for all of us. Thank you.